So Gearbox finally revealed some big endgame information for Borderlands 4, giving us our first look into what we can expect after completing the main campaign and going into the endgame where we're going to be spending hundreds or thousands of hours. So I'm going to be doing a bunch of different videos going as in-depth as I possibly can on all of these different systems and reveals. But in this video, I want to go over two of the big new systems in Borderlands 4 that are specifically focused around endgame build crafting that are going to be absolutely massive for endgame build crafting. And the first one is a system we've known about for quite a while, but we finally got further information on, is Specializations. And this system is absolutely crazy in terms of some of the powers you can unlock through this. Now, Specializations are essentially an endgame skill tree that are shared between all of your characters and all of the different Vault Hunters. So once you've completed the main campaign of Borderlands 4 and you get into Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, you will unlock Specializations. Now, you don't have to be max level to unlock this because the developer said that you'll be around 30 to 35 on average when you get into Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, and that's when you will unlock this system. So if you're not max level, you will now be gaining experience for your levels and your specializations. And once you unlock specializations, they will be unlocked for all of your other characters as well. So if you go and start a level 1 character, they will have access to your specialization tree and they will be gaining experience for it as you level up and play that character. And these are essentially the replacement for badass ranks or guardian ranks from previous Borderlands games, except these aren't just stat increases. They do have some of that close to infinite stat increasing, but these are much more focused on the different options that you get to select between and making choices between these really strong perks you can get that you can only have a limited amount of. And we actually got a lot more information on specializations from the blog post they did after the live stream. So we can go over that information first before we look at the skill tree itself in game. So they go on to say that there are 4 basic nodes to level up on the specialization tree, which provide straightforward buffs to stats like max life, shields, or gun damage. And these will be the first nodes you start putting points into at the top. And once you've leveled up a basic node far enough, you will unlock passive specialization skills to slot into socket spaces. Initially, you only have access to 1 socket for slotting in these specializations. After you've leveled up enough, you can have a maximum of 4 sockets. This will start to make much more sense as we also look at what it looks like. And then they go on to say that long term, your goal is to reach some or all of the 3 prestige nodes, which can be accessed once you've leveled up enough and invested the requisite points in the basic nodes. As an example, the Gadgeteer Prestige node that buffs your ordnance will only be unlocked after you've invested at least 10 specialization points into both the Survivor and Brute basic nodes. Slotting your specialization sockets will provide noticeable spikes to your power level over time, so you're always free to leave sockets empty or respec specialization points entirely if you're looking for more of a challenge on a new character after countless hours of leveling up. So that may have been a bit confusing, but now we can take a look at the skill tree where it'll make a lot more sense. So at the top, you'll see these 4 nodes. These are the basic nodes. We have Runner, Sharpshooter, Brute, and Survivor. And putting points into these nodes is going to work in a very similar way to how skill trees in Borderlands have always worked. So you put points into these, and then it seems every 5 points will unlock the next row, but only for that specific tree. So you see over at the Survivor side, they have 2 different nodes unlocked below that top basic node because they have 10 points into it. And those things below that they're unlocking are the specializations that are much stronger buffs. Remember, those top basic nodes are just stat increases. And they did also mention in their blog post that you'll be able to put hundreds of points into your specialization trees. So it seems like the bigger nodes are the things you keep putting more and more points into to kind of gradually increase those stats. But the specializations below those are much stronger, and those are the slottable things that you put in your sockets that are over to the left. So as you level up, you'll start with 1 socket to the left you can put one of those specializations into, after you keep leveling up, you'll be able to get up to 4 sockets, and all of those similar looking nodes throughout all of this tree are sockets. So you have a bunch of different options, but you can only have 4 on at a time at a maximum. And again, these are really, really strong. But then as you get lower into the tree, you'll see another big box, what looks kind of like the basic nodes. These are the prestige nodes that are also seeming to increase some stat, and you can put a lot more points into them. So like what was mentioned, you have the survivor tree, you have the brute tree next to it, and then in the middle, once you get enough points, you have the gadgeteer tree, which it seems you need 10 points into survivor and brute to unlock gadgeteer. That again is the prestige node that seems like you can also put infinite points into it. And once you get into that prestige node, that'll work in a similar way to other Borderlands trees, where it seems every 5 points you unlock another specialization. And again, all of the specializations, even the ones lower in the tree under the prestige nodes, are the things that you put into the sockets at the left. So you have the top basic nodes you can put a lot of points into. I don't think it's infinite, but you'll be able to put potentially like hundreds of points into those. You keep getting points to unlock specializations below those. Once you've unlocked enough points in 2 of the trees that connect, you can then get something like gadgeteer, which is a prestige node, and then you put points into the prestige nodes to get even more specialization options below that. So you can kind of think of this as like a mix of the previous like badass ranks or guardian ranks, where you essentially would just get points to constantly get small increases to stats. There is part of this tree that is still similar to that, but then you also have these specializations that are much stronger effects that you can only have a limited amount of. So you do actually have to make hard choices within your specializations once you get into the end game. Now, we didn't actually get to see any of the basic or prestige nodes and how much stats we can expect to be getting from those, but we did get a look at 2 examples of specializations, and they're absolutely ridiculous. I was not expecting this much power or interesting effects to be in the endgame skill trees. So first off, we have one of the specializations below survivor, which is called bullets are scared of me. The Vault Hunter gains increased damage reduction based on the fullness of their shield or health, whichever has higher maximum capacity. And the damage reduction is up to 30% when full. Now, damage reduction is incredibly strong, especially the more shield or health you have. That just also increases the value of damage reduction. And just having this effect makes you so much more tanky, especially since going into every fight, you're obviously going to have max shields or max health, whichever has a higher max capacity. Getting just 30% DR right when you go into a fight is massive, and it just doesn't go away when you get shot. It just decreases its effect as you lose more of either your shield or max life. So you're always going to have some amount of just straight damage reduction, which is going to be incredibly strong. And then the other node we got was under gadgeteer, and this is called full spectrum arsenal. This one is pretty crazy. So ordnance damage now benefits from increases to gun damage. And it says that the scaling here is 50% of increases to gun damage. So 50% of every increase to gun damage you have now benefits your ordnance damage. So your grenades or your rocket launchers or your minigun. So that is absolutely absurd. And just this one specialization node is actually crazy enough to fully create new builds, or at minimum massively buff up pre-existing builds. I think there will be some builds that kind of exist and are strong enough because this specialization node is so strong. That's absolutely ridiculous. And there will almost certainly, because of this node, be builds that are still kind of fully focused on ordnance damage that can also take a bunch of things that increase your gun damage to specifically buff up your ordnance. Because in a lot of the Vault Hunter skill trees, you're not always able to take something that's exactly good for the build you're trying to create. Sometimes you'll just have to take a node that will still give you some buffs but isn't focused on what you're focusing on. So not only will it allow you to get like more optimal pathing through those different builds, but it will allow you to take completely new things just because this is a completely new way to scale ordnance damage. Not only this, but a lot of your pieces of gear will allow you to scale your ordnance damage even more. Imagine getting like a class mod or something and it having like gun damage increases will now just increase your grenade or rocket launcher damage. So it seems like some of these specialization nodes are not just going to be like really big power increases, they're also just going to be completely insane for actual build crafting and options. Now, the second new system to Borderlands 4 that specifically in the endgame is going to have a major impact on build crafting are firmware. Now, firmware are essentially gear sets that are additional rolls on all of your pieces of gear besides your weapons. So you have 9 total slots, 4 of which are weapons, 5 are other slots. All of those other gear slots will all be able to roll a firmware on them. Now, firmware go up to 3 pieces. So if you've ever played another RPG that has set items, they work in a very similar way, but these firmware sets have different buffs at all 3 ranks. So what you could do is you could have 5 different sets of firmware, all with rank 1. You could have 1 set of firmware with 3 ranks and another set of firmware with 2 ranks. You can mix and match in any way you want. And we did get some additional information in their blog post. So firmware set bonuses have a wide range of effects, but they all have 3 tiers. Minor, which is 1 piece, major, which is 2 pieces, and full, which is 3 pieces. Minor and major bonuses provided by firmware are typically flat increases to stats like ordnance damage or extra skill cooldown rate. Full bonuses can provide unique effects like dropping down missile strikes or boosting your damage and lifesteal when your health gets low. So essentially what they're saying here is that of the 3-piece gear set, the first 2 are usually flat stat increases and the third is usually some much more impactful or interesting effect. And we actually got to look at 3 different firmware sets. So we have Deadeye. The first point is gun accuracy is increased by 30%. The second is gun critical damage is increased by 25%. That's a pretty massive damage buff. And the third is every critical hit grants 15% increased critical damage per stack for a maximum of 5 stacks for 10 seconds. Third, so once you get to the full set, so you have 3 of 3, the third one is always going to be much more substantial. The second set we got to look at was high caliber. The first piece is projectile speed is increased by 25%. This one could actually be a lot stronger than a lot of people actually think, but the second one is gun damage increased by 10%. The third is bullets pierce enemies. Now that one is also going to be absolutely ridiculous with certain builds and certain weapons. And the third gear set we got to look at is called Jacked. So one set is zoom in speed is increased by 20%. 2 set is Hyperion gun shield capacity is increased by 25%. And the third is Hyperion gun shields have a 30% chance to ricochet projectiles back to the enemy. And this is really interesting that we are getting weapon manufacturer specific firmware. So this one is kind of fully focused ADSing with weapons with Hyperion shields on them. So you zoom in quicker, so you can zoom in much more quickly to try to block projectiles with your shield. You get more shield capacity on it, and then you have a chance to just ricochet projectiles back when blocking damage with those weapon shields. So some of these gear sets are going to be manufacturer focused, and just based on the things some of these manufacturers do, their firmware sets could be absolutely ridiculous. Now, a big piece of the firmware system is the ability to take a firmware off of an item and put it on another item. And we got some additional information on this. Once you've completed the main campaign, you can transfer firmware from one piece of gear to another using a transfer machine. It's important to note that the gear that has firmware transferred away from it will be destroyed, and existing firmware on the target piece of gear will be replaced. But this is pretty major for not having RNG be absolutely ridiculous. You already have all of the normal rolls on your gear items, but not being able to transfer firmware would be ridiculous. And also, this is one of the main reasons why the developers consider firmware to be an endgame system, because you unlock this ability once you've completed the main campaign. You can't transfer firmware before you've completed the main campaign. You will still be starting to get firmware at level 25, and you actually could have the main campaign completed at 25, but again, the developer said you'll be on average like 30 to 35. So you start to get some firmware sets before you can transfer them off. So once you start getting firmware, I would definitely recommend probably saving a lot of those, because if you ever want to use that set, you'll already have a piece easily accessible to transfer firmware off of. And there is another reason why these are considered more endgame, and that's because once you get into Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, there are new firmware sets you can obtain. And not only is it just when you get an Ultimate Vault Hunter, but sets in new higher ranks of Ultimate Vault Hunter, you get the ability to get even more firmware sets. So with that being the case, I'm assuming there's going to be new firmware sets every new rank of Ultimate Vault Hunter. And keep in mind, there's 5 Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks when the game launches, and I'll be going over the Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks in another video, but there's going to be 5 on launch, and there's going to be a 6th added before 2026. So having new firmware sets every single one of those ranks is going to be absolutely crazy, and presumably those may be a lot stronger. That may also be a way in which they're increasing our power incrementally as we get higher and higher in the difficulties without making us farm more gear, really. So those are the 2 new big endgame gearing or build crafting systems we're getting in Borderlands 4. And keep in mind, this is on top of the massive new skill trees, all of the new gear we have to go farm, where we have more gear slots than we've ever had, all of the new weapon rolling and randomization within that can make some of the most ridiculous combinations. And it's kind of crazy how many new, interesting, and powerful effects we're getting just from firmware and specializations. I wasn't expecting these to be as big of pieces of build crafting as they're actually going to be, but this is just going to make endgame builds absolutely ridiculous in Borderlands 4. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.